is nobody in this country who got rich on his own. Nobody. You built a factory out there, good for you, but I want to be clear, you moved your goods to market on the roads the rest of us paid for. Yep. You hired workers, the rest of us paid to educate. Now look, you built a factory and it turned into something terrific or a great idea. God bless. Keep a big hunk of it. But part of the underlying social contract is you take a hunk of that and pay forward for the next kid who comes along.
Welcome back, and that is the essence of what we're going to debate in this segment as our special edition continues here at the Night Studio at the Museum. That, of course, was Massachusetts Senate candidate Elizabeth Warren defending the role of government. The resolution on the table today, there is too much government in my life, the hot topic on the campaign trail and on Capitol Hill. Let me ask you, in 2007, the nation's top 1% took home more after-tax pay than the total bottom 40%. And now new reports show that at least 1 in 15 Americans are living in extreme poverty. So the gap between rich and poor is widening. Shouldn't the government do something to address that?
Yeah, so the poverty rates are as high as they've ever been. So that's a good argument for the fact that current economic policies aren't working. Rather than trying to bring people at the top down to the bottom, we should be focusing on bringing people from the bottom up toward the top. Income mobility, economic growth. And so we have to keep an eye on what is necessary to grow the economy so we can have more broadly shared prosperity by giving people income mobility. Let people rise up. And that means take the barriers away from allowing people to rise in society. Don't have a society where we say this is enough, we're going to cap it, and we're going to try and equalize the differences. Because what ends up happening, if you looked at that new CBO study that's about income inequality, the best thing you could have to reduce income inequality is to have more recessions. I mean, that's basically what their conclusion is. And so you're going to have different outcomes of different people's lives. The focus of our government ought to be to respect people's rights so that they can make the most of their lives. And the difference in our philosophies is not equalizing the outcome of people's lives, but giving equal opportunities so people can make the most of their lives.
But how does one do that, George Will, if, as decades now of evidence shows, at least in the last decade, that this upward mobility in this country has stalled? Of course, Mitch Daniels is one who said upward mobility from the bottom is the crux of the American promise. Can government, should government do what the congressman is saying and allow upward mobility, which stalled?
Big government inevitably exacerbates the problem of inequality. Big government inevitably is a servant of the strong. I'll give you 2 examples. The tax code has been changed 4,500 times in the last decade. Every one of those times at the service of a group strong enough and attentive enough and wealthy enough to hire a Washington lawyer to represent them to game the tax code. The welfare state exists to transfer wealth basically from the working young and retired elderly, working young and middle-aged to the retired elderly. The elderly are, according to the CBO study, the net worth of a family, of a household, on average, household headed by someone 65 years old or older, is 47 times larger than that of the net worth of a household of someone 35 or younger. That's a record and has doubled in the last 5 years. Big government is responsive to big muscular interest groups.
Well, that's
George,
go ahead.
Let's just be clear about the facts. I mean, right now, the top 1% is claiming, in terms of their pay, a larger share of total income than has been at any time since before the Great Depression.
And their
tax rates are lower than they've been in 30 years. You look at that period. I mean, George, you say that big rich people and big corporations have undue influence. Yes, I agree with you. But the answer is not to shrink government and not even have government attempt to invest in education and job training and all of the ways in which we traditionally have generated upward mobility. The answer is to get money out of politics, to make sure that those who are at the top reaches, that is both individuals and corporations, don't have the untoward influence they now have. One final point. In the first 3 decades after the Second World War, we had in this country much more of an equal distribution of the fruits of economic growth. And yet what happened? It turned out that in those days, the economy grew faster than it's grown since. There was, under President Dwight D. Eisenhower, who nobody accused of being a socialist, a marginal tax rate on the top of 91%. Now, I'm not advocating we go back to 91%. I'm just saying that for conservatives to say that we cannot tax the wealthy when all of the nation's wealth and income, virtually speaking, is at the top.
Bob,
invest in people and education and training and everything else we need to invest. It's absurd
You
on
are a
its face.
pyromaniac in a field of straw men. No one is arguing against government investing in education. That's not the point.
Wrong.
The point is...
You guys are.
No, we're not.
No, we're not.
I'll make the
Certainly
point.
not. Look, I'm not attacking the elderly. I am elderly. I have 5 years ago, when I turned 65, I got my Medicare card. I showed it to my doctor. He said, "That's wonderful, George. Now we'll send your bills to your children." I find that a regressive transfer of wealth, and the welfare state is full of them.
Let me talk about education. In the first place, George, you were simply wrong when you say all the tax, I thought you said all the tax increases help the wealthy. I voted, Paul voted against, a tax increase under Bill Clinton, which raised the rate on the top people. At that point, it was above 150,000. I would go higher than that. It created great increase in revenue. It helped us balance the budget, along with military cuts. And I do want to go back to the fact that it is the right wing that wants to expand the government in the form of the military enormously, and also claims it's job creating. Interestingly, the only way we create jobs, according to my conservative friends in government spending, is not with highways and not with environmental cleanup, but by overseas military bases. But the point is that the Clinton tax increase was not for the wealthy. It helped. It raised taxes on the wealthy. It actually moved more in the direction of equality in the tax code. Secondly, as to education, it is this attack on public spending that we have had to defend Pell Grants, college aid for low-income people, against right-wing efforts to cut them. And in particular, when I talk about income inequality, both Ben Bernanke and Alan Greenspan correctly hailed community colleges as a major way, as a transmission belt. But community colleges are largely public funded, and community colleges are suffering from this right-wing attack on government revenues, so that our ability to give community colleges the funds that give people the skills they need is being eroded by this blind-sided attack on government.
Congressman, when it comes to taxes, we've just said that the top 1% pay 38% of all federal taxes. But 49% of American households don't pay any taxes at all. Any federal taxes at all. Is that fair?
It is, if you don't think Social Security is a tax. In fact, the Social Security tax, which is a very significant tax, which goes to what George was just talking about, Medicare and Social Security, is not only a tax heavily paid by lower-income people, but it's regressive. Because if you make $100,000, then everything you earn is taxed. And if you make $1 million, 10% of what you earn is taxed. So yes, if you exclude the Social Security payroll tax from the calculation, then the lower income people don't pay tax.
But if you look at a percentage of their income, make your point.
What? But if the percentage of income that's taxed is taken into account, and you take Social Security tax, then that figure isn't true.
I want to go to the audience. We've got a question there about lobbyists.
I'm Jerry Beliles, director of the Miller Center at the University of Virginia. And my question is this. Many Americans believe that Washington is dominated by lobby groups that represent both the left and the right. And I'm curious whether, in your judgment, that's the case. And if government is influenced by too much in the way of lobbying, then how do you reform it without jeopardizing or threatening our valued traditions of the right to organize and to speak freely?
Well, let's broaden that. We're jeopardized by lobbyists and historians. Let's get the whole...
Let me ask you first, Congressman, and then I'll ask you, Secretary.
I was struck at something Bob said. How does having big government get money out of politics? It's the other way around. If the power and the money are going to be here in Washington, that's where the influence is going to go. And so what we're doing by having big government concentrated in a few, in politicians and bureaucrats up here, that is where the powerful are going to go to influence it. Well, by reducing the size and scope of government, by having government live within its limits, you're reducing that power center and decentralizing it and sending it back to the people where it belongs.
Can I stress again? I am struck by, can I just say one again? When people talk about limits, you guys just keep exempting the military. There is an enormous amount of military. We spend more on the military than on Medicare. We are building roads, and we are building schools, and we are building bridges in all kinds of countries in the rest of the world. And somehow it's money that's spent on the military disappears from your worldview.
Secretary Reich, since people really do worry about this, and as the governor said, it's both parties, how does one get all of that money out of government, out of elections?
Well, first of all, we have much stricter campaign finance laws. I think we may need an amendment to reverse the Supreme Court's ridiculous rulings that say that money is speech and corporations are people. I mean, how absurd. You know, the average First Amendment rights of most people are being trampled on these days because so much money is flooding Washington. Paul Ryan, going back to your point, my concern is not so much with the size of government, it's what government is for. And if you and I can just simply agree to get money out of politics and to reduce government to the size that it works for average working people, not for corporate welfare, not for defense contractors, not for Wall Street, not for agribusiness, not for all of the big industries that now claim so much of the public weal. Then you and I, maybe we can make some progress.
But we passed McCain-Feingold, so everything should be all fine.
Well, McCain-Feingold was
the Supreme Court threw it out, Paul. You know that. That's disingenuous.
It is axiomatic that if you want to reduce the role of money in politics, reduce the role of politics in allocating money and opportunity in this society, leave it to the market, private voluntary transactions between individuals.
George, you say leave it to the market. Well, we've tried leaving things to the market. Look what happened on Wall Street. Yeah. We left that to the market and Wall Street exploded. Look what happened Massey Energy. We left that to the market and we had mine cave-ins. What about the poor in this country? What about education? What about job training? What about roads and bridges and everything else we depend on? You're going to leave that to the market?
Some of us think that the big problem began in this country in the financial crisis because a lot of wizards in Washington decided they just knew how many Americans ought to own houses, and they were going to do whatever they needed to do to support banks, to subsidize banks, and to set interest rates that would encourage this.